Hi folks, Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the education situation in the Western world. There's always constant screaming and teeth gnashing and fingernail chewing that black students don't have equal outcomes with white students or Asian students for that matter, and that girls in STEM don't have equal outcomes with boys. So this is the general view that the very leftist, very globalist, very communist type teachers unions and academia, they say, well, it's just because of misogyny, it's because of fucking racism, it's because of Hitler, and they add things that say schools in black areas are getting not the same amount of funding as schools in more affluent areas, and that if these differences in funding are addressed, then which includes things like class sizes, for example, that and various facilities, that if these issues are addressed and there's equal funding, that the student outcomes will be equal. That black students will get exactly or minority students, Hispanic will get exactly the same outcome as white students in affluent areas. Now that's an absurd proposition from the very outset. I've been to a school in an affluent area and been to a school in a not so affluent area. It wasn't very long in the non-affluent area, and I was it was a huge shock to the system to go there, and I can't tell you how pleased I was to get out of that school. But it had other sort of, as I got older, I looked back and sort of saw different benefits in it. But nonetheless, there was, but in the school in the well-to-do area, if there was an appeal by the school library to get more books, for example, then parents would give their children money to buy books, or would take their children to comb through secondhand bookstores, or would buy books directly. So the parents took a very active role and treated the education as very important. And to give you an idea of the two sort of schools, in one school, the teachers and the students had regular punch-ups. The police were around every day dragging students off. That's how the view of the poor area was. They didn't give a fuck about education, most of them, and they were violent and brutish for the most part. Many of them ended up in, not all, but many of them ended up in prison. Now, the difference with the school in the affluent area, and parents very concerned about education, there was some in fact, I was in the class, and there were a bunch of kids in this class sort of mucking up, as I suppose you could call it. They were making paper airplanes and throwing them around, and getting cups of water. This is in a science room, like getting cups of water and throwing it at each other. Yeah, but compared to the other school, very tame stuff. Nobody's getting injured, nobody's getting hurt, and there was no dead bodies or anything like that. So, but this was considered unsavory and unseemly behaviour for this area, for this sort of school. So the form master came in while this was going on and pointed, do we have your father's work phone number? That's all they had. And suddenly this silence descended on the room. Everyone quietly got back into their seats. All disruption and bad behaviour stopped as the students contemplated the father getting a phone call. Mr. Smith, this is Mr. Jones, the principal of the school. I'd just like to call you in regard to your son Billy Bob or Jimmy Jack, who's has been causing disruptions in class. Do you have a moment, Mr. Smith? You can just imagine. I'll be over to see you in the morning, Mr. Principal Jones, and thank you for your call. I'll give Jimmy Jack a very stern talking to tonight, and thank you again. That would have been, and as the students were obviously contemplating that possibility. So there's a huge difference in commitment, and if things were needed at the school, whether it be equipment and the Department of Education was dragging their feet or taking a bit too long or something like that, then the parents would become quite actively involved. And for example, there was the school couldn't afford tennis courts or something. There was something in sports, and so the parents got together, form a collective, so that the tennis club down the road could be hired out on sports day, and this was all paid for by the parents. This is the sort of extent of involvement parents have. I mean, they have the means to be more involved. So there's always going to be a difference between a wealthy school or a school in a wealthy area and a school in a poor area. Quite aside from the parents being concerned and caring about it, and themselves having an education and seeing its value, to the people on the other side that don't see the same sort of value in education, and that would resent it. Why do I want my kid being educated? I don't want my kid thinking he's better than me, and that sort of thing. So the whole lot of issues that go into it. Now, on the matter of leaving children behind, or this was a constant catch cry in varying forms. But I remember reading articles about it from that go back as far as the 1960s, even earlier than that, I think. But to do more with class than race at the time. But there was a view. I went to a private school, in primary school, and it was extremely rigorous. You had to learn Latin and Greek and all sorts of shit. But the view that the teachers took was that nobody would fail the test, and that's the equivalent of no child would. Every student would pass the test. That was it. That was the deal, and we'll do whatever it takes to get you to pass the test. Now, the overall view is everybody should be able to pass. That was the view. So there wasn't a view that you're an idiot, you'll never make it, or you're too stupid, or you're too lazy, or you're this or that. Then they took that view that given the right attention, the right help, and the right support, the right encouragement, some of the encouragement being quite brutal, by the way, that every student could pass, and that there would be, the super bright ones would be at the top, but generally there'd be a band. All students would be between 65 and 85% in the exam, the independent impartial exam. So that was the view taken, and there was no assessments for, well, there wasn't a racial issue there, but there were no assessments for class or gender or anything like that. Everybody was judged the same. Now, or graded the same, I should say. Went through the same rigor of grading. Now, I'm remembering back to the time here, because it's a while ago. The teachers were, if a student was a bit slow, the view was that if you weren't passing or weren't doing well, you either weren't concentrating, or you weren't trying hard enough, or you simply weren't applying yourself, which was, I suppose, a subset of not working hard enough. So, and the other thing too, that I don't know if it happens today, I don't think it does, but the other thing, the teachers were very keen, particularly keen, to notice or shake out any natural talent the kid had. And I remember a kid that was very good at drawing, just seemed to have a natural aptitude for it. And the teachers very much, if they could discover any natural aptitude, they didn't care what it was. It could be in art, it could be in music, it could be in sports, it could be in mathematics, it could be in poetry, whatever it was, they didn't care. They would try and discover that, and then encourage you and give you extra classes and that. So for this kid, I remember this kid, I can visualize his face now, who was good at drawing. Actually, it was a girl who was also good at drawing as well. And they would arrange extra classes for them in that subject to try and encourage and bring out that talent that they presumed was natural. And the kids enjoyed that, or were more likely to enjoy a subject in which they were naturally gifted and would pursue that. So there was that. But coming back to the idea of no child left behind, the school was determined that every child will pass the exam, and we'll do whatever we have to do to get that to happen. Now, the teachers were very dedicated, as I recall. They were happy to stay back. They were happy to do anything and everything to well, I suppose there were limits, but to help the student. So the student needed time after school, or needed individual attention during, or even at lunchtime, or something like that. The teachers were available to do it, and they were quite, I thought, even thinking back now, quite well, dedicated, of course, but quite selfless in wanting to help the students. But they came back ultimately, okay, you're still not passing. We've given you the extra time. We've given you the extra coaching. So the only two reasons are is that you're not just not trying hard enough. You're not concentrating. So it was seen as that. So back in the day, this is before a teacher would get arrested for looking sideways at a student. Back in the day, the physical punishment was considered a normal way of doing things, and there were kids that were even as a kid I knew that kid is too fucking dumb. He's never going to pass the test. Why are you beating the crap out of him? Even as a kid, I could see that. But the teachers, whether blinded by ideology or perhaps they were, they had some sort of sense of mission. To say, well, we're not going to let this kid fail. If we let this kid fail now, he'll be a failure for the rest of his life. So we have to do everything we can now to prevent this kid from being a failure and to make sure he's a useful, productive citizen and so on and so forth. So, there's some altruism in there as well. You're quite apart from just being a dedicated teacher. So there were some kids that were really thick, really dim. And boy, did some of them get a hiding, because the presumption was you're not trying hard enough. You're not concentrating. And it got to the point where, certainly in my view, and even thinking back now, that it bordered on overt cruelty, because the kid was too fucking dumb. He just wasn't gonna get anywhere. Maybe they had dyslexia or something. I don't know. But beating the shit out of him wasn't going to achieve it. I remember I came. There was some big family drama one night, and I didn't get much sleep, and so I came to school quite drowsy because I hadn't really slept all night, and the teacher didn't cut me much slack. So you had these each lesson would start with 10 quick mentals, as they called it, and the teacher would walk around with like a cane, like a ruler sort of thing, like a cane. You had to have your hands on the desk, and so Billy Bob, 69 times 53, and you had to be pretty sharp on the ball, or the times table was a favourite, 12 12s, and so you had to really come out with it, sort of, especially the rote learning stuff like the times table. You had to come out with it bang, right on it. And if you didn't, if you hesitated for a bit, you'd cop something across the back of the knuckles, which hurt like hell, by the way. But I remember being on that day drowsy, and I remember copping a couple of hits, and even through the fog of lack of sleep, sort of the concentration came in, and so then I rattled off the answers. But the teacher must have seen how tired I was. So I thinking back now, were they getting off on doing this shit? It makes you wonder. But the thing was that no matter how hard they tried, and they did try, let's give them credit, they really tried. Even kids that they were punishing, like physically punishing, they would still have the door open. Look, Jimmy Jack, we'll be here. Look, when school finishes, we'll have a class for this, and it doesn't matter if you're the only one, and we can spend an hour with you. Did you know that there's actually a coaching clinic in town that is available on weekends? Have you thought of going to that? They were genuinely trying to help Jimmy Jack pass his tests, but in some cases it didn't happen. And I must say they never gave up, but their perseverance was frequently resulting in beating the crap out of the kids. I mean, they'd be arrested and put in prison for doing that stuff today. But that doesn't take away their dedication. Now, you've got various ways of doing so. What we have to stop those Nazis or those racists. That's how we're going to achieve it. Or we have to throw money at it. Or we have to have class sizes of 2. Or there's all these various sort of methodologies, but none of them seem to work. The situation I'm talking about wasn't in a racial thing. There was some class issues there, but there was a certain number of kids from poor circumstances that were given sort of, I think, the equivalent almost of scholarships, really. But I don't think they were picking the right sort of kids to do that. I'm convinced some of those, looking back now, I'm convinced some of those kids were just low IQ kids and incapable of thinking at the level required to do that sort of stuff. I mean, talking Latin and Greek and French and everything, that was beyond these kids. So anyway, that's it. But that's a case of not leaving any student behind. But the whole emphasis there was to raise the standard. We're going to let the best performing kids do as good as they can, and we're going to leave them at that level. If they get 100 out of 100 in test, well done. But the kids that are falling on the wrong side of the line, you'll be up below 50, we're going to make you succeed and make you be able to compete with the very best kids. And I think overall, I think the brutality is wrong, but overall, I think that creates a more equitable society than it does the other way of saying there are Nazis everywhere and throwing money and that sort of thing. I don't think that achieves anywhere near the same thing. In order to achieve the sort of equity that they go chasing after, they have the lower standards and lower standards and lower standards. The situation that I'm talking about, when I was a kid there, the whole emphasis was on raising standards and getting the slower kids or least capable or maybe the lower IQ kids, somehow forcing them into being successful and being able to compete at a level with the brighter kids. And I think in the end, that is more equitable than any other system I've seen or heard about. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.